RingCentral's AI receptionist uses voice AI to answer on the first ring, so you'll never miss a call again. In just a few minutes, you can personalize your own AI receptionist to answer questions, route calls, schedule appointments, and even send texts in multiple languages. Plus, it's easy to scale. Create unlimited AI receptionists across any phone system. It's all powered by one reliable platform for effortless AI communications. See for yourself at ringcentral.com. RingCentral, voice of your business.
This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Malick Hour, a celebration of the life and work of American filmmaker Terrence Malick. Hi everybody and welcome to the Malick Hours. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic and the author of the Magic Hour, the Magic Hours, the films and hidden life of Terrence Malick. I should know the name of the book by now, but apparently I don't. Today I'm delighted to have with me Shane Hazen, an editor and someone who worked on The Tree of Life. Now, Shane, I want to know, because I watched Tree of Life yesterday and I watched the credits come up, and you have like a number of credits on that film, right?
Right. Yeah. You went straight to like the big question of 27 months of my life. I also I have never seen the Criterion extended version until yesterday, and I watched it and got a bunch of big flashbacks. But I guess the quickest answer to that is at one point the glib thing I always say about my experience on Tree of Life is I started out as an intern on their first week of post, and cut to 27 months later, I'm the finishing editor. It's the glib thing I say, but it's not true, because I also did like an internal count of how many editors I thought, knowing the footage and knowing the iterations of the cuts, actually contributed to Tree of Life, and there are 5 credited ones. I counted 16 that have made a contribution to Tree of Life. So there was just a lot of people working on it. So yeah, and credit was a weird thing. I hit that line in the extended. I think it's in the only extended city section and not in the theatrical, where Sean Penn's on the phone and he starts talking about when you're young, it's about your career. Yes. That line hit when I watched it yesterday. Yeah.
So it speaks to you specifically. You're seeing yourself in the Sean Penn character.
Well, I haven't watched Tree of Life much in the last few years. I did. I think before I watched the theatrical earlier this year, and before that, I probably hadn't seen it in like 7 years. A few years ago, I was hanging out with newer Malick editors, and they put it on in the background to get me to do a commentary on it, and I was doing this is what happened behind this shot, and this is who. And sometimes one of the reasons I guess I stopped watching is you just start doing this jockeying, like who cut that, or when. And I used to, when it first came out, I would say like, you know what, I didn't have maybe one scene I did that I start from finish, but. And then, a scene is very tenuous when you're talking about Tree of Life. But I used to say maybe 2% of the movie I kind of originate something in, but it was like my fingerprints are on 98% of the movie, because no one had ownership of cuts. Like everyone, and the whole way the process of the movie came around was in long iteration. So it's jockeying for credit. Is every time I watch it and I start thinking about it, I also feel a little gross, just because the movie, I'm so happy that the movie turned out, and it turned out, and especially when I get away from it and I see how well it turned out, I'm just impressed, because, for such a chaotic process, how well it came together, at least in my eyes. So.
Well, I feel blessed that I got to see it in a way that was, if you like, unmuddied by behind the scenes knowledge or even expectations. I remember when I went to see it the first time, there was no sense of, I didn't know what was going to happen. I think I'd heard mutterings from Cannes, but it came out in Italy about the same week it came out in Cannes. Maybe it was like a couple of weeks afterwards or something. It was quite soon too. It was earlier than in England. It was earlier in the US. I remember that much. But I was utterly unprepared for what I saw. We'd never seen Malick direct something that had a contemporary scene in it. It was the first time I'd seen that happen. And then the whole, first section, the Q section, if you like, the creation of the universe, all of that sort of struck me as a huge surprise at the time. What was you started as an intern. What was your sort of, how did you get that job?
Well, if you want, I actually have a story before I got the job where I was working I was an intern for the Austin Film Society, and I'd also at the same time interned for Richard Linklater's production company. His assistant editor was Chris Roldan, who Terry then used and became a Terry staple for a long time. For the Film Society, I would project occasionally dailies. And one day I got a call saying, can you come in Sunday afternoon? And they're projecting Tree of Life dailies. So I got to see a big footage while they were still shooting. And I would meet a lot of people who would be a significant part of my life for the next 3 years. Like AJ Edwards and Nick Gonda were back in the projection booth working with me. Chivo kept coming back into the booth. I wasn't really formally introduced, but like I had to walk up front nervously and ask Sarah Green and Terry, like, are you ready to start dailies? And I was rushing back and forth. And at one point, Chivo came back and said, you have the film backwards. And it was because the film doesn't have a soundtrack, so I had flopped the image in there. And Chivo was back there a bunch, and I was rushing, and I remember I bent down to thread the sound, and then the projector was open. I jumped up real quick and hit my head and saw stars for a second. And then I just ignored it, continued threading, went on to the next one. And Chivo looked at me and goes, you're bleeding. And blood was trickling down my head. That was my first experience and I got to see the footage. And I just remember thinking how blessed I was to have seen that early, like, because a lot of it was the Matagora stuff. There was a lot of second unit. I think some of the Jack Burr stuff in there. And I just and the thing is, like, when you first start working on a Malick production, it's funny how over the course of a few months, you get kind of blasé about how amazing all this footage is. Like, it's almost a required thing, because to make something out of it, there's very little stuff in that is not beautiful looking, even though it's all kind of sketches. So, but as to the job, Chris Roldan, he knew him from Detour. There was a call out on the Film Society forum for then. Chris hired me and started out intern at the time. They were very vague. Just they had so much footage and they just knew they needed a bunch of hands. And so the first thing I did, which I told you about, was we called it audio cleanup. And it was an idea of how to make dailies a little more palatable for Terry, but we barely really used it, but it was Terry's talking through most of the footage. And he's mostly, it's not so much direction. Sometimes it's camera directions, mostly it's lines. One of the funniest things while watching the movie yesterday or this year, I was amazed at how I can still hear what Terry's saying in there, and how so much of the acting works so well when we cut the line out, even though I know in my head that someone is looking like they're thinking, what they're processing is the line Terry's giving them. But the way it comes out on screen, it's just like, it's gorgeous performance. Or one of my favorite techniques that really killed me, which at the time I was like iffy on when we were editing it, was how many lines he would cut out of Brad whenever Brad's chastising Hunter, Jack. And so, like that one meal where he throws the napkin in his lap, he goes, one meal. There's lines all around that, but we just kept, I think the one meal line was isolated, moved around. And so whenever he points, he's saying something, but it comes across as your dad is punishing you and expecting you to know something you don't. It's just such a great effect. And there's so much acting like that throughout the movie.
It's so funny you mentioned that line, that one meal line, because I rewatching it yesterday, just thought, God, that's such a typical thing of someone to say, a father figure to say, of like, you're always, that says you're always failing. There's a standard that you should be, and you're always, you just for one meal, can't you behave? It has such a weight of expectation and guilt behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one thing, I feel like, and I've told Terry this, like, I feel like I learned everything, the majority of what I know about editing from that place, even though I think it's weird because everyone thinks Terry has, because he has such a singular voice, he only knows one way to make a movie. But like that whole, and everyone in the group, there was the most talented group of people I've ever worked with. And so, but one big thing was reducing lines, just like body language and getting people to act. Because I mean, like I think it's one of the central powers of like the performances and in this in particular, but all of his movies, where like you're reading body language, so you have to lean forward. And it's also one of the things that makes it hard to talk about him, just because everyone has their own subjective opinion on what the movie means. And as we started finishing the movie and started screening it, it became both the problem, but also the blessing, because the more you can feel people were getting it, even if they weren't saying it, you knew the movie was working better. So
you mentioned earlier, and again on my rewatch, it's something I really, I'm watching these chronologically once more, and just finished The New World and now onto this, and you notice that the idea of a conventional scene, is disappearing completely. There are very, very few traditional scenes. Even when he loses his job, where you feel that two or three shots have been put together to almost be a scene. The shots are taken. One is taken from another room, one is from outside the house, and one is from inside the house. And so there's no way you're seeing something that's going from A to D. It's just not working right. Were there ever like scenes that you were cutting together and then you were reducing, or was it always going to be like that?
Well, yeah, that's the first year. I mean, that was the process. Like Mark Ishikawa, who was one of the, for the last year and a half, the main editor who stayed consistently through. It was a push-pull when we were bringing the movie down. Mark used to call them landed scenes, and we always treated landed scenes as like. The big edict Terry had early on was the movie needs to flow like a river. And so when you're cutting these scenes down and you're realizing there's so much energy when you bring the fragment of a scene, and you can get across the majority of it with just a shot or two, and you connect it and you have this just fun energy, it can only go so far as long as you don't have a landed scene that like acclimates people to where they're at. So going back to my journey into the thing, when I started out, I was nights and weekends and intern, and so like at the end of every shift while editing, you take the trash out of the place, and you get assignments. You weren't necessarily you were just supposed to play around, but the big thing, he wasn't religious about it, but Terry would have you triangulate scenes. So these scenes, they have Terry's throwing out dialogue. He wrote some dialogue. And they're based on a scene that was from the script, but they also had a free improvisatory, you can go wherever feel to it. And so when it's that free, you can write in editing. You can basically make the scene what you want, but it's got to be good. And so with the many versions, we triangulate. You make 3 cuts of something, and in theory, although it didn't really reply to it, Terry would then take the 3 parts of it and put it together and see what it was. And so that's why there was whenever people talk about the length of the earlier versions of it, that's why it was long, because you very iteratively figured out what is the scene that's coming across more quickly, better, what is the scene that flows better, and what scene is falling by the wayside. And then it got to a point where scenes would get forgotten, but we knew there was good stuff in it. And mostly my last few months in there, I would take bits of old scenes and reappropriate them and that's how like a random shot would come in. That was a lot of what I was contributing.
In terms of there's obviously sort of 3 large parts to the film, in the sense that you have the sort of the beginning and the genesis. I mean, I'm simplifying because I know there's probably much more like 5 or 6 parts to the film, but you have, say, the beginning and the genesis, and then you have the Waco scenes, and then you have the epilogue sort of to the beach, and I know Sean Penn is dropped in there. As you're editing them, are you starting sort of in the middle, or are you starting with the special effects shots, or how are you approaching that?
Well, from the very beginning, I know this is going to be confusing. You mentioned in the book, Terry, talking about projects with letters. Like, it's funny because it's hard for me to wrap my head around calling it part 1, 2, and 3, even though I know every section we just had a go-to nickname for it. Like nicknames stayed, and sometimes you won't know. But from the very beginning, there was like a diagram that showed 1, 2, 3 in there, and 1 and 2 had an ABC underneath it. So the first two parts were then divided into three. So every section, if you talk to an editor, they talk about 1A, 1B, 1C, 1A being the grief section, 1B being Shaun of the City, 1C being the creation section, and then 2A, BC. And it's funny because 2A and B basically blended together, where it was birth of souls and then early childhood. So it was like birth to age 9. And then 2C, it's funny when you diagram it that way and you use just automatically assume equal parts, 2C is just the lion's share of the movie. And so first, Keith Frey's mainly was on 1C, which was a big chunk, the creation section. AJ Edwards was doing he worked a lot with Terry on 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B, and C, and Part 3, which Part 3 didn't have an ABC to it. It was called Eternity at the time. And then these were loose names because, I mean, Terry didn't want anyone to literalize what they were. So, like, for the first year, I was pretty much strictly on 2C sections, and that's where the lion's share of my work went. The structure of the movie mainly came around that, too. So
when Terry was working on this, you say there were 16 editors in total, or 16 people who had a hand in the editing in total. And you've got a situation in which there are different people working on different parts of the film. How is Terry kind of supervising that? Is he sort of walking from room to room? Is he sitting down and watching complete cuts, or how is he marshalling his resources?
Yeah, it was mainly he would work with main editors and give assignments and check in on stuff like intern stuff. And when I say 16, we're talking 27 months. So it's 16 people over 20. There was more people that tried editing stuff, but actually contributed to the picture. Avid has a Unity process where you can connect all the stuff. So Mark used to say, because being there all the 27 months, my other important resource was he always said I knew where the bodies were buried. Like I knew almost all the footage in the movie, and because I was so excited to be working there and it was working nights, so I'd stay up late watching all the footage, or it kind of became an issue for a little while, but I was watching other people's cuts. But eventually also in the thing office, everyone got used to being able, because they had to share cuts. So so much of the cuts are just so iterative. And so when I say I didn't have a single scene I start from finish, just 3 different people would have it along the time, and Terry would then he would work with someone on something. They'd get to a point, maybe they'd make an improvement, maybe there was some interesting thing, but never really getting to a final point. And so they'd move on to something else, and while they moved on to something else, Terry'd be like, "Hey, AJ did a really interesting cut of this. Why don't you take a look at it? Or just why don't you take a whack at it?" Because some editors, AJ in particular, had a thing where he didn't want to see old cuts of a lot of stuff if he had to start tabula rasa on a scene. But it's so hard. I find it hard to explain. Despite the fact that I can't say this enough. Tree of Life was my first movie as an editor, and like this process was magical. It worked amazingly. The office was so collaborative, and there wasn't really competition, especially just because we knew the main editors that were going to, who Terry used. So, like, it was just, I've wanted to do every movie this way since then, and no one can afford to do it, much less, even when you have 2 editors, they're just like, how do you do that? And it was the most foundational thing I know.
When you say you've seen all the footage, I mean, stories have come out about Tree of Life. I remember Chivo around about the time of release saying, we could have made an entirely different movie with just Sean Penn as the main character. We shot so much stuff. Was that just a comment about the amount of footage, or was there actually so much of was there a narrative there that was sort of movie worthy?
It's hard to say, just because if you wanted to take 2 years to work on the Sean Penn stuff, you could. And I think there's a argument that there's a lot of elements in Night of Cups and Song to Song as a more completed version of the city section of Tree of Life, just like Voyage of Time is kind of a completed version of the creation sequence. But I think it's mostly that you could have just made a different movie out of it if you spent the time working on it. As like full-blown narratives, I mean, yeah, there's stuff dropped, but you also, how many, like watching, I was thinking yesterday while watching the extended cut, how just for brief glance, if someone watches the theatrical and extended right next to each other, they got a good sense of what the last 6 months was like, where you're trying to get the movie down. And you could see like sections of the movie are bringing new ideas in. Thoughts are completed in a different way, but also there's sequences that you're like, what is this doing? So one of my favorite quotes about the process of making the movie, I don't think it's ever seen the light of day, but it was Mark told me when he was interviewed for the EPK, he paraphrased Dolly Parton. And Dolly Parton's quote was, "It takes a lot of work to look this trashy." His quote was, "It takes a lot of work to look this messy."
Well, Dolly Parton is always good for a little bit of wisdom when you're
and inspiration.
Absolutely, 9 to 5, but you'd be 9 to 5 as in 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I imagine.
That's a fair assessment.
When you rewatched the extended version yesterday, what was your? I mean, you said you were thinking about Terry's voice and things, but how do you see the film now?
Well, the funniest thing, I haven't seen the extended cut, but I've seen the official extended cut. But for years I've seen it, and just like again, I feel gross thinking like, oh, that's the scene I did, or the scene I worked on, or and it's not that way because it's like the scene I most worked on, but there were just more scenes I did in there. The craziest one, when my first interning, they signed Billy Weber and Chris Roldan signed me the first scene I worked on, and I didn't know it was my first professional thing, and I'd never worked with Avid before, so I didn't know how professional editing workflow worked. And normally when you edit, the first thing you do is you make selects, which you go through all the footage and you find the parts, you cut up bits of shots where you think this is going to be a dynamic thing, or this is a good performance moment, and you build your scene around the selects. I didn't know that. What I did was I took all the footage, laid it out on a timeline, started cutting out bits I didn't like. And I worked like 2 weeks on one scene, and Terry surprised me one day. He's like, well, let's take a look at it, and showed it to him. And you can imagine the nerves. And I had another editor friend who contributed to the movie, whose name is barely in the movie, TJ Vulgaire. And his whole time there, he said it was the best thing I ever did while I was working there. When we're talking, the scene was like, because of the way I did it, like 12 minutes long. And I don't remember how quickly it went by the wayside, but it didn't stay that long. But every once in a while, Terry'd be like, let's see if we can get it back in. And we cut it down, and it made the extended cut, even though I think I remember that version of that cut, and just like, it was just so cut down. As you can imagine, a 12-minute scene to 2 minutes, especially that's not much, but it gives you a sense also of why these scenes can be cut down, just because you can get it across quickly. So, I mean,
when I was watching it last night, I was thinking of how, the phrase, to flow like a river. There is something about the film which is just constantly moving you. It's not still for a moment. And even in the way it's sort of operating like memory, you see bits which you think are connected, and they're not. They're separated by maybe weeks, maybe days. The scene that I always think of is when the children see a limping man, and then they see a drunken man, and they imitate him, and then they see a limping man who's obviously got a disability, and that they feel guilty that he might have seen them, but they're not the same kids, and they're not wearing the same clothes. Those are two moments that might have happened, weeks apart, and there's something very disorienting about that for an audience. Was that like a major concern? How did you keep the idea of like an audience that has never seen this film before sort of in mind for how it would be received?
I remember that was a big conversation piece, just because you assembling 2C in particular, you would check out the color of shirts. Like, that was a thing. If you had the idea to put two scenes together, but then the process was the editors watched it just like not every week, but every few, they'd hit a stopping point. We'd watch it. I want to say around fall 2009, I was starting to get on that watching process. So I got a little more, and we got the other skill set that I feel really strongly about all the Malick editors coming out is we got really good at talking about how a movie feels, like, especially, and it wasn't just about it working. It was like, what is it doing when you put it together? So we would typically write long, like 3 or 4 pages of notes, and then Terry would each one of us, and then we'd all print out copies for everybody, and then we'd sit around going over the notes and like, did this feel right? And you'd celebrate the wins that you're like, this really worked, and stuff that you're like, well, I think this is a bridge too far, trying to combine this and this, or like this section to this section doesn't feel as right. And a lot of your work for the next few weeks would be based on someone else's notes, where he's like, and sometimes you'd say like, look, I had something I really thought I worked. I want to try it. And you try it. And then, sometimes Terry would be like, just do somebody else's note, or try this, see if you can make this work. Then gradually out in LA, we started showing it to more people. And that was a mind-opening process. And Terry and Mark were so good with that process, where you know the phrase, the note behind the note.
Yeah.
That's how it had to be, just because everyone had emotional, visceral reactions, but when they wanted to verbally tell us how they feel about it, it was actually probably less helpful. But being in the room, feeling something working, it's the best way to sense what an audience is feeling. So,
I mean, many people will be surprised to hear that Terry is taking notes from people in Hollywood, for instance, outside of his.
It's not that much. It's more friends and family.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's actually mostly friends and family. And Terry's not in the room during the screening,
right?
But I mean, because the big thing you mentioned in the book about how many times he watched Tree of Life, actually start to finish, I think that's the thing that impresses me most when I watched it yesterday, just because having been through such a long process with him, I was like, this is, to me, and maybe it's just because I've been on the floor of this, but it's coherent to me. And Terry, it's just how he navigates that. The big phrase he used to use was snowblind. He doesn't want to get snowblind, so he doesn't want to watch the movie too much, and he doesn't want to watch a run too much. So we had to watch it in scenes with him and then build to that. And yesterday, I feel like he was really vindicated in my eyes. I was like, wow.
Well, I was noticing, there's a moment where basically you first experience Earth as an underwater shot crashing, a wave crashing, and then that wave crashing comes right at the end again when they're on the beach, and you have a sense of there's a folding. This is the beginning of Earth, this is the end of Earth. And I remember last night I was watching that and thinking, oh wow, exactly that point. This is so cohesive. This is so I can feel those tones and those echoes, spread out, not simply within the flow of the movie.
Yeah, that, and and those are little things that that it's weird, because if you put one shot in a movie, do you I don't feel any it's hard to say your contribution, but I was doing a lot of that towards the end, and AJ and Keith were doing a lot of that towards the end, just because that was the results of some of the note sessions, where early on, I think that feeling was, especially when the movie was super long, that the lion's share of the movie was 2C. So it's like, how do you make it a coherent movie? And then when you started putting it together, making people watch it all the way through, it started becoming more coherent, but you still wanted to cohere it to where parts from here came, have to relate to other parts of there. But at the same time, you don't want to be obvious about it too. So, or very literal about it. So you have to be associative and do we talk about, I don't remember the definitions of them, but Wu Wei and Inshin.
Remind me.
I'm going to get these wrong, but they were 2 edicts that came and go. And when it came and went, sometimes it would be a Terry kidding on the square thing. He'd say it with a smile on his face, but he was also serious about it. One of them was to walk in a river without leaving a footprint. And
right. This sounds familiar.
The other, I'm already blanking on it. The other one was they were just basically not to show effort, not to show intention. Because, I mean, that's the thing dramatically when you're watching a scene that doesn't work, say, a scene that starts playing some schmaltzy music or something over that. Your instinct goes to, I know what type of music I'm hearing right now. I immediately know that the filmmaker wants me to feel. I don't feel it yet. I feel annoyed and manipulated by that. And whereas if you gradually come to this conclusion, you make an audience member lean forward and come to your intention a little more, even if you're like not showing it and you're being subtle about it, you have a shared experience. Like it forces you to give more to a piece.
It almost becomes more interactive than just passive.
Yeah, and Terry wouldn't say this, but I always felt this. It comes out of the musicality too. It's the way movies and cinema are more like music than narrative sometimes.
And the music is a huge part of this film. The use of the tracks Lacrimosa, which comes again. I always get surprised that it comes again on the piano later on in the Waco section of the movie. And there are just so many moments in the film which you suddenly are taken by some music and transported forward by the music. And I noticed, like at the very end of the film, the sort of the chorus is really leading the movie. It's no longer the music is in the background. The movie is kind of almost like leading the length of the shots and everything. It's entirely becoming based on the music.
That was the end music was locked in pretty early. I think it was an emotional experience. AJ and Terry were that sequence. Puts, part of the process sometimes is putting select reels to certain pieces of music, and they knew they had a win pretty early on. Terry also on subsequent movies, a lot of when he's trying to cut it down or trying to figure out the shape of it, he will talk about the musical structure of a movie. And so we do talk about motifs and how if this piece of music evoked this at this part of the movie, if we played at this part of the movie, how is that coloring this scene? And if you remembered that at an earlier part of the movie, is it going to bring back the emotional part from that earlier part of the movie? But can you do it differently? Like the Lacrimosa thing, just a humbling way. But Lacrimosa is over kind of the introduction of the formed universe with the Lacrimosa was Preisner wrote that supposedly for Kieslowski's funeral, and so it's a mournful piece played over the birth of the universe, which really gives you a sense of the birth-death cycle. And then playing it later, you're in a very humble place. Like sometimes you put music onto a thing and luck into something. I know some of the stuff I was finding, I remember doing a lot of work on towards the end of 2C was we would take Alexander Desplat would give us stems. And so you get stems, meaning you have the parts of the music. So we just took his drums out and used his drums. Simple as that. But in effect.
There's not much Alexander Desplat in the movie, is there? I mean, it's pretty...
There's more than I remembered.
Right.
And Hanan has a lot in the movie too.
Yeah, Hanan Townsend, who actually I think arranges the piano for the Lacrimosa piece as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and the other funny thing I'd watch that I can't explain to people, and I almost don't want to, show any of the magic trick stuff behind, was just manufactured scenes, like the piano duet with Brad playing the piano and Laramie playing guitar. I remember that scene working, but there was some issue with it, and either me or TJ put another piece of music over it that didn't match, but it was much, much better. I think that's not Greensleeves, is it? And we and also for the motifing of it, like it worked better. And so you had to then cut around. Hanan had then come up with a guitar piece that matches what's on there. I think Hanan had to do that. And then you had to cut around the piano just because he's not playing that piece on there. So you just cut right at the moment where you see the piece playing the wrong key and stuff like that.
That's amazing. That reminds me of, on the Thin Red Line, them putting, the Rosy Fingered Dawn is kind of digitally acquired because they couldn't get the Rosy Fingered Dawn, which seems crazy because it's a Terrence Malick movie. Surely he should have, miles of footage of Rosy Fingered Dawns. It's the one thing that should be guaranteed.
We had to come up with, because there was so many effects in this, and all this is trial by error, we had to come up with much cheaper ones. The other one I forgot was really funny was for the longest time this movie was going to be done and in fact it was negative cut. It wasn't going to be finished digitally. Do I need to explain that too? Okay, so when you shoot on film, for people who shot on film, you have to develop the film, and when you do it on a motion picture, what you do is you don't edit with the original negative you did, you make copies of it. And then when you finish, you have someone go back to the original negative and cut that, which is only one version of it, even though they can make interpositive stuff like that. So it's going to be negative cut. And so Terry came to me like towards the end when we were finalizing a version of it that was going to be negative cut. And I like to, my big thing as an editor is like I like to manufacture stuff that the footage was not meant to do. And so like I'm constantly speeding up footage and reversing stuff. And so, and this is also to give you a sense of how you could rewrite a scene or change the thing of a scene. But after Terry told me that I was the only one that contributed money that needed to have speed up shots or flop shots and things in the movie. And the scene after, whenever Hunter's running, after he takes the 90 from the neighbor and runs in the river, like how they shot that, they shot different ways of 90. So one was he puts it underneath a piece, and the other was he puts it in a river. And this would be in a conjunction with me and Terry talking about a different way to play that scene, but I thought it was cool. Like what he did was we edited so he puts it underneath the wood, but we don't have a shot of him lifting it out of the wood. So you take another take of him lifting out of the wood and you reverse that, and then you cut to him putting it in the river. So you get both of them into the scene.
Oh, that's so funny. I love that trickery. That's amazing. That's really good. One of the scenes that struck me as well watching it last night that I think is a core scene of the film, and I just think it's edited and shot so well because it's like, again, you probably count the shots, probably 5 shots total. But when in the Barton Ponds, the young boy drowns, and the fact that the camera is sort of following the other children moving away from the body that's floating in the so it's sort of moving in the opposite direction to how you would imagine somebody would be looking. Surely you would be darting towards the body rather than away from, and yet the camera sort of drifts away, and then you see an underwater shot. That whole sequence is so well done, I think.
No, especially that's the thing that strikes me sometimes is the confidence in certain shots, because I remember earlier cuts where there was a lot more footage to it. But the first year, and I wasn't really huge into the editorial influence at this point, but the first year the big lesson was when they had all this footage and different iterations they could have done, was keep it in Hunter Jack's perspective. Every scene has to be from him. And you those note sessions when we'd watch the movie later, obviously there's scenes that aren't in his perspective. Sometimes you'd work to find ways to get it back in his perspective. We also use the phrase a lot of a baton handoff, where you could go off a tangent where it was a Jessica scene for a while, but then if you cut to a shot of Hunter watching it, then suddenly it became him watching his mother do something. And so a lot of the MO behind a scene like that is, the spectacle of a kid dying, a dramatic scene like that, even with, Brad's being involved, and you still want to keep it in Hunter's perspective, because the whole thing's not about, oh, this kid died. It's about Jack witnessing death or really witnessing death.
And also looking at his father and sort of that whole thing of like, you let him die, it becomes God and his father conflated of like, you were, there's admiration, but also you didn't save him. There's admiration because he's obviously a man of action. He's jumped in. Also, one of the things that, Malick at this point in his career is extremely famous for, and it's become somewhat of a trademark, is the voiceovers. What stage do they come in during this process?
Voiceovers are throughout the whole thing. Right. Voiceover, speaking for me personally, is one of the hardest things to do. Right. Just because it's the where Terry puts his voice on it. Not literally, but it's where I think he as free as he can be about making these imperfect, trying to look messy, and he wants to hide intention. That's where the infusion of the idea gets across, and yet he knows that this has to emotionally work. So we recorded so much voiceover, and you would have to try experiments with, does this work here? And 98% of it doesn't work, and it's very, very subjective. And yet at the same time, Terry's wanting wins that the room feels. He wants, if he thinks this is amazing, it's nice, but he wants it so that other people feel what he's feeling. because that's how it then turns into its working. So, and yeah, it's just Hunter and Jessica recorded so much voiceover for this movie. And sometimes they're basically, with Jessica, I remember she had 3 sessions where it was like, use that session. Like, that's the one that she has a tone that we have to use for this. Even, one audio thing that comes in the very, very beginning of the movie, her first thing, the nuns toss. I remember as an editor, I hear background noise come in really abruptly there, too fast, because they recorded that outdoors after a scene. But that was the run to use.
That reminds me of Linda Mann's in Days of Heaven.
Yeah.
There's a story that she's telling, and it's on a tape deck that they've recorded in a hotel room.
Billy tells that story really well. I mean,
did you have so Billy Weber's been editing Terry since Badlands. I mean, is he sort of giving you guys like instructions, or this is the way we've developed it? Do you get a sense of sort of the history of how that relationship has progressed?
Well, you had in the book the iteration of editors. So Billy was there the first 3 months. Daniel Resende came right after that, and I don't remember Jay Rabinowitz came right away then. Then they overlapped. I think that's how it worked. And then Mark I don't know if he took over when they both left, or how Mark overlapped, but then Mark was there towards the end. So yeah, a lot of it's because Terry's feeling his way through this process. I can't get across how intuitive he is with trying to figure out if it emotionally works. And, he doesn't know if it works. Like, everyone's just kind of in it, like, we're all in this together. So when it kind of terms, sometimes there's things like this worked in the past, but at the same time, as you've pointed out in the book, Terry's trying to do new stuff. So old processes may not be the thing you want to use. But I mean, then there's a lot of it's war stories. Billy would tell they'll tell war stories about what they did on another movie and how they were at this point in another movie.
What about was there ever a point where they just said, let's, I mean, in terms of developing new ways of working, new strategies, new aesthetics, was there ever a point where they just said, look, we've used voiceover for everything so far, why don't we just not use voiceover? Was there a point where there was that was a possibility, or was that written into the script and the whole process in this one?
Well, it's written in the script, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the other thing I can't, people find funny, but I think is a really good way to make movies was Terry right away. I came in and I started reading the script, which was much longer than there were different versions of it because there were so many added scenes. And Terry flat out said, don't read the script. And he told Chivo, don't read the script. Because in every movie I've worked on since then, I wish directors would let me do that. And I kind of say that, and they treat that as a sign of disrespect for the script. But it really is like, if you really want to let the footage speak to you, you can't have the preconceived idea of what it was supposed to be. Back to your voiceover question, overall, no voiceover. I don't think we ever got to that point. But as scene by scene, yeah, every scene we would try to see if we can get away with no voiceover. And there was always that push-pull of too much voiceover, not enough voiceover. Is the voiceover doing some kind of context? You'd be surprised at how much of the screenings for even something that is going to strike everyone as esoteric and operatic and obtuse or something like that. We're just basically, we have an idea what this scene's supposed to be communicating. And when we show it to an audience, there's a certain amount of information that needs to be gotten across. We're seeing if they got that information. One of the weirdest things we had to fix or work on in LA was making sure people knew that Hunter and Sean Penn were the same person over time.
Right. Yeah. I see myself as a young boy.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even I was thinking as well, watching it again last night, my brother died when he was 19 years old. If you don't have that line in the film as voiceover, then there's really, there's no other. I mean, you see somebody has died, there has been a funeral, there is, you get an idea of who it might be, but that line is, I mean, it doesn't even name the brother. I mean, it doesn't even.
It struck me watching it last night that that is a voiceover line that didn't really change much over the iterations. And even those sequences of shots, that was pretty early on, that stuck for a while. There were a few scenes. It's weird because I was watching this and Billy was in there for the first 3 months of a long process, but I was like, that's a Billy scene. And I remember one of my favorite cuts of the movie, and it's always been our cuts. And I remember my first time seeing it is the cry from when Jessica learns about the son's death, and she has that like wailing cry that's cut in half, and you cut to the sound of the airplane, the engine in the airplane. And I remember seeing that for the first time, and this is pre-mix, so you're not going to have some really thought out stuff, but they had a stereo set up, and Terry likes playing stuff loud, so Billy played it loud, and I just remember that's when I was like, oh, this is a movie. Like this is I'm watching something being made.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing. That also has the old cosmic beam coming in later in that scene, which is a crucial element, and something of a I wouldn't say a trademark exactly, but it's a sort of consistent touch in the films. Going back to the sort of genesis and the sort of material that was to some extent, as you say, preceded by Q in terms of the ideas, and then latterly by Voyage of Time. I mean, that I mentioned in the book, that was one of the more controversial ideas in sense of, should we not have it? Should we have it? Where should we put it in the movie? Should it be interspersed with the Waco scenes? Can you talk to us a little bit about that, sort of the evolution of the evolution?
I don't know if it was controversial as much as we just thought, like, the internet, all they cared about was like, I heard Terrence Malick's making a movie with a dinosaur in it. And like, there was a big thing about that silent sequence, but then how much voiceover do you want to put in to like iterate it back to the cosmic versus an individual's life and the story of birth, death, grief. So length was an issue, but not really. And as much as the movie had everyone's hands on everyone's all parts of the movie, and with our fingerprints all over the movie, one scene was mostly Keith Frey's. Keith Frey's mostly worked on it. Now, towards the end, or even a little before the end, I guess last year, 8 months, there was talk of interspersing it. That was Billy's instinct. Billy said all along he thought that's where it was going to go. I was my instinct too, but I flat out threw the gauntlet down and told Terry, it's like, I'm going to fix this. And he's smiling. He's like, you do that. I mean, just no version I did even like got out of the room. It was like, it was just, and I told you that story earlier. We were doing a screening with, and it was kind of a cool director was seeing the movie, and they were giving notes. This is also a learning process of how to do notes, where the phrase Mark used to say is "Don't lead the witness." But they were talking about the kids jumping and the scenes of the energies with the kids, and they were just like, "Look, I love this scene." And when I was watching, I was thinking of the dinosaurs and the energy of the dinosaurs, and how these kids are just like animals, but they have joy in them. Why don't you cut a shot of the dinosaurs? And Mark's like, yeah, and kind of takes a note. And so after the screening, we're going over notes of like, what do we work on? What do we pay attention to? And I mentioned that note to Mark, and Mark's like, oh no, we don't need to use that shot, because if they're thinking of it, we don't need to cut to it to show it though.
Right. It's too literal.
So Mark was a big compartmentalization guy. Mark was a big, like, these are pieces that when you put together, you're going to associate better. You don't need to intercut them. And yeah, Mark always had, Mark's job. I can't say enough praises for Mark. He's a talented editor. He's great in the room. He's just such a great person to work around. And he's also good. They always treated him as the lander of the plane. And so he's not imposing his vision on something. He's trying to read the room, but do what his director wants, and he's just very good at that. And he was the one, I think, that had the most coherent version of a compartmentalized version of that.
I loved as well the on rewatching. There was a scene where they're basically catching balls that are coming out of the sky, and it's just the way it's edited, it just looks like these balls are arriving from God almost. They're just, and you've had Jessica Chastain say, that's where God lives. And I think the voiceover is actually referencing, I think maybe the boy has just died and they've just come back from the funeral, or it's immediately, the scene is immediately subsequent to that. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the case chronologically in the film, of course. And just the fact that there was no, or there were very few shots of like the balls going back up again. It was all the balls coming down.
One of the other funniest things about when you watch, especially now that the fun thing about watching this extended version is like it's cemented. It's out in the world. I don't have to give notes on it anymore. And one of the things when you watch a movie this many times, you remember one screening where you gave a note where you're like, that's weird. And then two screens later, they haven't changed it. And you're like, that works. Like maybe you were just behind on it. And just hearing your description, I'm like, yeah, that's totally great. And I'm pretty sure I gave a note being like, why aren't we showing another version? So what is it? Why are we having this many shots in the next movie? But yeah, it's Chris Roldan. He didn't finish out LA, but he had a chart of how many times the different editors had seen the movie, and he had himself at 46, I think, at one point. Oh, and then after he left, I think AJ or Keith had to have overtaken him.
So when you'd locked the movie and you got to, did you guys all have like a wrap screening of the whole thing once it was locked and fixed and nothing was going to change, or did you all sort of go your separate ways, like veterans of a war?
Little go separate ways. It's funny because one editor she's not even in the credits, but was one of the main finishing editors was Claire Simpson, who's now Ridley Scott's editor. And Mark was not day to day, but he felt ownership, so he was coming back. And so I remember last night they let me go to watch a movie at the Hollywood Cemetery, but I was texting them off and on like, "How's it going?" But it was to finish the mix, and yeah, that was the last mix night, at least in the final version. And yeah, pretty much. Although I drove back to Austin, and AJ and Keith by that point had moved to Austin, and they were kind of gradually moving on to, Keith was still doing Voyage of Time stuff, and they were maybe moving on to the next movie, but there's always the possibility that they may have to do some little tinkering because after they sold to Fox, there wasn't any picture changes, but there was little mix changes here, or as they negative cut, but then they changed their mind and eventually did a digital intermediate. Chivo did one, and so little changes came from that, but nothing significant. I remember the first time I saw the first reel because Fox made the suggestion of like, and it's a simple suggestion of like, look, you don't have to be clear on what people are hearing throughout the entire movie, but it's better at the beginning of the movie if people at least get a sense. So they wanted just to boost the first reel a little. And so we went to the Animal Draft House South to watch the first reel. It was the first time I saw the color timing of it. And then it was just how revelatory it was. But premiere, no, we saw the full length final version a little bit before the American release at the Paramount in Austin.
And what were the feelings of the group?
It was after the Palme win. So, I mean, it's tricky because the whole thing, like, I kept using the phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm saying this on my first movie.
Yeah.
So I'm asking everyone else. Yeah, I think there's periods I didn't know what we had. There were periods I was really proud of it, but there was periods where I'd watch the movie into the ground. So,
and I mean, this film took years to edit, and it's typical of Malick's films to take a long time in post-production. Days of Heaven also took a long time in post. Now he's got Way of the Wind that's finished shooting, I think, in 2019. We're in 2024, and there's still, as yet, no publicity, no announced release date. Do you look at that and sort of think, okay, that's feels typical to me, or do you think is there a sense that maybe they're going for something even bigger than they did with Tree of Life?
That's interesting. That's very possible. It's very likely. One of the things I fought a lot on subsequent jobs after working with Terry was I worked in a lot of mid-budget indies, which mean very low-budget indies. And in the contract, they usually have like the boilerplate was like 12 weeks. And to the T, if you gave me 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks, like you could figure more stuff out. A lot of editing when it's good is like writing, and this as a writer, a lot of writing is thinking. I don't think I've mentioned it to you, but I directed my first low budget film.
Oh,
And I
wow.
shot it.
Congratulations.
Well, I shot it a year and a half ago, and part of my other being magnanimous towards Terry right now is I'm on the other end of this, like where I'm like, I want more time, I need more time. The ideas aren't coming. The more time you spend on it. Back to the indies, though, when I talk to these producers, like, you could give us more time. A lot of times they'd say, well, we're not making a Terrence Malick movie, and I'd say, like, I'm not asking for 2 years. I'm asking for just like maybe another month, and you will see the difference between. I had another director working on these type of movies where she thought the indie template was like aspiring for a B+. And with Terry, it's just as to where the went. I think that's intriguing, your interpretation of that. I hope so. That sounds cool.
I think there are surprises around the corner for everything when it comes. No, all bets are off. I felt this about when Tree of Life came out, and then To the Wonder, was finishing shooting in this period. He was finishing To the Wonder in Paris when before Tree of Life turned up in Cannes. He was sort of coming down from. So I'm not saying he's gone off and shot another film in the interim, but he could have done.
Yeah, it's. It's funny in your book the difference between the time off. And you make a really good observation, which is hard to talk about during this time, of how much fun, like, it was. We worked hard, we worked very hard, but the office was a place of fun, and Terry was having fun making movies. He loves the process of making movies. Like, he just wants to be making movies. So, another thing he would say that for the interview stuff, all this stuff, was he just said, what was the term? I feel like we're bricklayers. Like, he's just like, he wants to do the work.
Yeah. And all that thing about a micro language, and you've already said it today, a few times about, he would use this phrase or this quotation, and it would inspire you to work. I think you told me when we first spoke about this for the book, you said one thing that really struck with me was this idea that you were going into work thinking, we're going to push the parameters of sort of film language today. We're going to push the possibilities of what you can do with movies. And that's got to be an amazing experience on your first film.
Yeah, especially with footage that's backed up. You have, ostensibly, even though she'd done movies before, you have the Meryl Streep of another generation just being, in the can, and no one's seen her. Brad Pitt was just one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, and he's giving a great performance, and we're shaping him into a really good performance. And yet the other thing that really struck me, even though I know there's a lot of shaping going on behind it, is just Hunter is amazing in this movie. And a lot of the work we did to get him across without saying much, like, Terry's edict on what you use for Hunter was like, do you see thought behind his eyes? Do you see something going on behind his eyes? So his eyes just did so much in the movie for his performance. And to say nothing about the boilerplate, what everyone else was selling the movie on. It's like the cosmos, birth, death of the universe. It was just so exciting. And also a director who was just wanted to push things, even though he had these things, these big elements in his back pocket for the movie.
Well, one of the things I walked out of the cinema having seen the film for the very first time, I'd never seen a baby shot like that. I'd never seen like the skin of a baby that close up, except when I saw my own baby, except when I had my own children. And even watching it again yesterday, there's a bit where Hunter lays out the negligee, the nightie of the woman. The sunlight is falling on his skin, and you can actually sort of see goose pimples on his skin, as if he's guilty, he's embarrassed, and he's sort of at a moment of sort of shivery, what's the word? Transgression. And it just was like, wow, how Chivo has managed to get that focus right there where you can see that. It's actually absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, one technical detail I don't think anyone's ever talked about in any of the stuff I've read about Tree of Life is we edited in SD. We didn't edit in HD. So like you probably kind of see that in the cut, but for the most part, you're not seeing that until you get on the big screen.
Is there anything that you cut out or any scene that was left out, even of the extended cut? Which, by the way, I think I saw the extended cut on the big screen at Venice
Oh,
when
wow.
it premiered, and I wrote up a piece for it, and it got very little hoopla when it came out. I don't think it was not as much as it deserved, I feel, because I feel it's not really a director's cut in the sense of a like Ridley Scott or something like that. I feel like it's kind of just a different movie that you can use as a companion piece rather than, you know, there's no sense of like this is the movie he wanted to make and the studio wouldn't let him, or this is a restored version. I think the theatrical cut is absolutely the movie, and this is like you can watch this as well and get something else out of it if you like. But I thought even yeah, sorry, the original question, sorry, was there anything that you sort of thought I wish we'd somehow found a way of getting that in the film?
Not, I mean, there's a lot of scenes I missed. There's so many fun experiments we did, but no, I think like the fight that I do feel weird about and regret about is like it felt when we were cutting the movie down, sometimes it felt reductive. Like you were, because I always differentiated between, look, this is a movie, and I feel this way on all movies, especially long movies. Like you need to make it so someone who's disinterested has to be compelled to like it. And sometimes that comes down to being shorter. Like I
Yeah.
know how anathema it is for me for a 3 hour movie. Yeah, but there's so much stuff that I miss. There's so many fun sequences I wish could be seen in the world, and that was the fun of watching the extended cut. You know, another thing that I learned a lot in the movie, and I'm kind of want to turn the question to you about this, was I was a pretty headstrong film cineast guy, and I still am to most extent, but for the most part, when you start, every time I run into a young person that has very strong opinions about something, on a movie, I now really feel strongly like there's someone who feels just as strongly disagreeing with you, and you're humbled by the fact that what's the Billy Wilder quote? Individuals are dumb, but the audience is a genius. Like you could really passionately be like, this is the movie, this is what it has to be, and you get in front of an audience and you're wrong, and
Mm.
you have to change it, and you're just humbled by it. So I I'm curious, just you're more. I want to know more people's thoughts on the extended cut now.
That's why I wish it had a sort of more than just a Criterion release. I wish it had spent some time in cinemas and sort of had a proper release, or even just have a budget release so people could get it for relatively. I mean, who did I read? It might have been Matt Zoller Seitz, but there was somebody I read who just said, "Look, this is just a different movie. There's no point saying is this better than this or is this? It's 40 minutes more." I mean, from a biographer's point of view, this movie was a gift because it showed so much more of Terry's life that was just I just knew to be factually true, that I could say, oh, that's his uncle, and that's his other uncle, and that's his, and that tracks biographically. I mean that's one thing, and I know you don't want to necessarily talk about this because we've talked off record and we've talked off microphone about how protective you feel about his private life, and I don't want to infringe on that. The only thing I would like to ask, though, is that you are working on something which is sort of self-evidently biographical to some degree. Was that ever approached in the process?
This is going to be the thing I think surprises a lot of people. We don't talk about it,
Right.
and some of it's just respect for. But and it's weird because Terry will openly talk about his life, but no, we didn't. And again, talking about how coherent the movie is, like it's impressive that it's just impressive he made something coherent about with his clay. And I think it just comes across as being rude if you to a certain extent, and it just felt like it wasn't helpful in the process after a certain point.
Right. It's not going to inform any decisions, or it's not going to.
Well, okay, going really back to the extended cut, one of the big changes between the international version and the theatrical, and it was a big bone of contention. Some people had certain sides, was the way 2C ended. And I always had the feeling 2C already felt like a full movie. And then you had two incidents that gets Hunter away from the home he knew in the movie. You had him going to boarding school, and you had Dad losing his job.
Yeah.
And the theatrical one, I was a very strong proponent, one need to come out. And even though, I think AJ and Keith were on the other side, where it's just like, but it's there's more emotional scenes when you have them both together. And like, I'm glad this version's out in the world.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get the sense, I mostly from your book that's pretty closely what happened in real life. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny in the film, because in the film it sort of becomes, it's almost becomes a portrait of the house, so that when they're leaving the house and the house is empty and they're driving away and looking back, there's a sense of like, once the house is gone, it doesn't really matter where they're going. That's it. They're done. So to see the boy in the school, that makes a film much more Jack's story. Then that sequence becomes less about the house than it does about Jack. So do you see what I mean? That's the difference I felt.
I've listened to a few of the Terry podcasts you've done, and you read your book, and I know sometimes you've been trying to get to an overall theme of what Terry's stuff is about. I don't know if I still feel this way, but I remember for a certain time I thought most of Terry's movies were about trying to regain Eden.
I could definitely see that, and so in a sense, Eden is at some stage in Waco. It's as a baby playing with alligators with his mum and having just that attention. Even when his little brother is born, it's already going wrong.
That's the nuanced part about it, where Eden's always it's nostalgia, it's idealized, it's always gone, and then another Eden comes up that you missed. What's the city line? Life passes by, like pictures on a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, I mean, the New World. Did you find your indies, John? I fear I may have sailed right past them, and it's just like, yes, that's it. You sailed past your Eden without even noticing. On that bombshell. on that point, I think that's a wonderful place. Let's stop at Eden. Let's stop there. Actually, one very, very final point. The last sort of photorealistic shot. I know there's a special effects shot, the visual effect shot right at the end of the kind of entities or the universe. But the last shot of the bridge and the bird sort of swooping. I'm kind of curious to know, with all that footage, how that shot was sort of landed on, and at what stage that was landed on.
If I'm being honest, I had that thought last night. Where do we come to? I generally think it was kind of a feeling like a Bridge to the Future type thing, because that was not the last shot for a long time. But I mean, the Lumia was always the last shot, and then the sunflowers were usually the penultimate, if not one of the third or second to last shots. That is second unit. Ellen Kuras shot that, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I mean, this also goes to that thing of like, sometimes we don't have verbal or literal explanations for, just Terry feels something and everyone else in the room feels it too. And a lot of the trick when you have a 2-year process of watching something, and it can also be part of the frustration, is you watch something, you come up with an idea, you get a win in the room, you get one win the next day, you watch it, you don't feel the same way again, and it doesn't stay in the cut. And even if intellectually you're like, this should work, and you could work it into the bone, and maybe you do get it to work. And there are definitely scenes that, like, persistence does help, but insistence is not good. So
Brilliant, Shane. Thank you so much first for your help with the book. I really appreciate it. The book would not, hopefully, as rich as it is, without your help and your collaboration. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, John. It's good to talk.
you.